Tonight, we take you directly to the western coast of Saudi Arabia, where an intense and fast-moving weather system struck the port city of Yanbu with surprising violence. December 8, 2025, Yanbu, Saudi Arabia, a day that began under a sky heavy with humid air and an atmosphere unusually dense for the Red Sea region. A day that suddenly escalated into one of the most turbulent episodes the city has faced in recent months. As viewers prepare to see the footage behind these words, what you're about to witness is not the consequence of a long-forecasted cyclone, nor the aftermath of a seasonal monsoon. It is the raw impact of an unexpected convective explosion over the Red Sea, a weather event that surged across the coastline with intense rainfall, abrupt downdrafts, and a chaotic pulse of wind powerful enough to push the city to the edge of paralysis. In Yanbu, the morning had started quietly. The sea was strangely calm, the horizon slightly blurred by warm mist rising from the water. But meteorologists across the country had already been tracking unstable air masses drifting northward, fueled by a mix of surface humidity and cooler air sliding in at higher altitudes. The National Center for Meteorology had issued warnings across 8 regions, highlighting heavy rain, thunderstorms, sudden wind bursts, and a risk of flash flooding. For many residents, these alerts sounded like the usual seasonal advisories. But as noon approached, the sky above Yanbu darkened with an astonishing speed. Within minutes, towering cumulonimbus clouds rose and folded into one another, forming a massive storm head that transformed daylight into a deep metallic gray. The first raindrops were large, heavy, and widely spaced, a classic sign of an atmosphere overloaded with moisture. But moments later, the rain changed character, turning into dense sheets that hammered rooftops, asphalt, and parked cars with a relentless cadence. The footage visible now shows how quickly visibility collapsed. What had been a clear road only seconds earlier became a thick curtain of water, where headlights turned into faint blurs and street signs disappeared behind the wavering waves of rainfall. Witnesses described the sound inside their cars as deafening, as if stones were falling instead of water. Some reported feeling their vehicles shake under sudden gusts, a testament to the strength of the microbursts generated by the storm. As the rain intensified, the wind began its assault. Branches bent, thin metal panels vibrated, and shop signs swayed dangerously above sidewalks. The temperature dropped abruptly, a typical sign that the storm's cold downdraft had reached the ground. People caught outside rushed for shelter, struggling to keep umbrellas from flipping inside out. In several neighborhoods, power flickered. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Drivers activated their hazard lights as water collected rapidly along the sides of roads. The storm poured extraordinary volumes of rain in a short time. You can see on the footage that the rainfall density becomes almost opaque, creating a white-gray wall behind which the city's outlines dissolve. Inside residential districts, the storm slammed against windows with a rhythm that residents described as explosive. Interior videos captured doors vibrating under pressure shifts and wind gusts producing hollow booms as they hit building facades. For the coastal areas near the harbor, the storm arrived with such force that water ran off the streets in waves, dragging loose debris, cardboard, leaves, and sand along its path. The sky flickered repeatedly with distant lightning, although thunder was often drowned out by the roar of rain and wind. Officials reported later that the storm system above Yanbu was part of a large convective mass that had developed over the Red Sea, fed by unusually high humidity and strong vertical lift. Weather observers confirmed that updrafts inside the storm were powerful enough to build towering clouds and sustain intense rainfall cores for long periods. While this wasn't classified as a cyclone or organized tropical system, the internal dynamics of the storm produced rainfall rates comparable to severe thunderstorms in monsoon regions. For nearly an hour, Yanbu remained under this atmospheric assault. The streets echoed with the constant impact of water, as if the entire city had been placed under a waterfall. Drivers pulled over to the side of the road, some unable to see even a few meters ahead. The storm wrapped the city into a shimmering haze of falling water. Residents later described this moment as surreal. There was no gradual rise or buildup. The intense phase struck fast, peaked violently, and left the city stunned. But what made this storm particularly striking was not just its intensity, but the way it behaved, almost as if the atmosphere had compressed several hours of meteorological force into one sudden release. According to experts from the National Center for Meteorology, the storm emerged from a phenomenon known as a rapid convective pulse, a sudden vertical ascent of warm, moisture-heavy air that collides with a cold upper layer. This created an explosive uplift that allowed the storm cell to grow with exceptional speed. The development was so abrupt that satellite images captured cloud tops rising thousands of meters in just minutes, a sign of a highly energetic system usually seen in the tropics rather than the western Saudi coastline. Residents later said they had seen the sky morph in ways they had never witnessed before. Some described the clouds as boiling, expanding outward in bulging masses that stretched across the horizon. Others recalled how the daylight dimmed into a bluish-gray tone, creating a visual effect similar to an eclipse. The shift in atmospheric pressure was so sudden that some people reported discomfort in their ears, something usually associated with altitude changes rather than weather in a coastal city. As the main core of the storm passed, the rain began to lose some intensity, transitioning from an overwhelming deluge to a steady, heavy downpour. But the danger was far from over. The ground was already saturated, drainage systems overwhelmed, and the city's low-lying zones started filling with water faster than they could empty it. This marked the beginning of the second phase, the aftermath of the rain, the waterlogging, and the slow emergence of flooding across the streets. With the rainfall easing but not fully stopping, Yanbu entered a new state. Everything was soaked, reflective, and submerged under varying levels of water. Roads became long shallow rivers stretching from one intersection to the next. Cars moved cautiously, cutting through water that climbed halfway up their tires. The footage from this moment shows dozens of vehicles stalled or abandoned, engines drowned, hazard lights blinking weakly as water pooled around them. Even as the worst of the rainfall had passed, the city looked trapped under a thin yet persistent layer of water spreading across residential and commercial zones. Sidewalks disappeared completely, transformed into shimmering channels that blended seamlessly with the flooded road surfaces. Pedestrians lifted their clothing, stepping carefully between floating debris, while water splashed against storefronts and apartment entrances. The smell of wet dust, mixed with the scent of storm-soaked soil, drifted across the air. Yanbu, usually bright under its desert sun, now appeared washed out, the color drained from buildings under a dull, reflective sky. Drainage systems churned relentlessly, but the volume was simply too high. Water pushed back through grates, creating bubbling fountains in the middle of the street. Traffic remained chaotic, with drivers unsure of which streets were passable and which had become too deep. In several neighborhoods, small streams formed as water flowed downhill, carving new temporary paths along curbs and alleys. Even light vehicles struggled, their engines sputtering as water levels rose around them. Residents reported hearing the odd metallic clank of submerged obstacles hitting against cars, carried by unseen currents below the surface. Shops attempted to keep water from entering by placing sandbags or makeshift barriers at their entrances, but in many cases, the water found gaps, seeping inside and soaking floors, carpets, and merchandise. You can see in the images that the reflection of storefront lights on the floodwater gives an almost surreal appearance, as if the streets had been transformed into a shallow lake. Footage shows residents wading through knee-deep water in some sectors, holding personal items above their heads as they tried to reach safer ground or return home. Public transport slowed drastically. Buses crawled forward with water brushing against their lower panels. In some cases, drivers chose to stop entirely, unwilling to risk deeper sections where vehicles had already been lost. The city's emergency services issued alerts advising residents to avoid unnecessary travel and remain indoors if possible. Social media filled with videos showing overflowing gutters, water surging down slopes, and parked cars partially submerged. Despite the gradual retreat of the storm, the water showed no sign of receding quickly. The soil in Yanbu, adapted to dry climates, absorbed little. Instead, runoff continued flowing through the city long after the heavy rainfall had ended. The atmosphere remained heavy and humid, the sky still thick with low clouds reflecting faint evening light. Streetlights turned on earlier than usual, their pale glow diffusing across the flooded streets, creating long shimmering lines across the water. It was a landscape shaped not by destruction from the sky, but by accumulation on the ground, a different kind of danger, slower but equally disruptive. As the storm's main core moved eastward, Yanbu entered a prolonged and grueling phase. Streets remained heavily soaked, while water continued accumulating in low-lying neighborhoods. The downpour had transitioned into a relentless but slightly lighter rain, yet the damage on the ground was already being compounded by lingering water, flooding alleyways, and saturating residential and commercial areas. The city, unaccustomed to such sudden surges of water, struggled as its drainage system reached maximum capacity, often failing entirely to cope with the unexpected volume. Standing water mirrored the dim sky above, turning ordinary streets into reflective pools that distorted every streetlight, sign, and building facade. The city's normally bustling intersections became slow-moving channels of water, as vehicles cautiously inched through, engines straining against the rising levels. Footage captured from street corners revealed an unusual sight. Cars partially submerged, wheels hidden beneath water, some already stalled and abandoned by drivers who had little choice but to leave them. Emergency personnel were working tirelessly, navigating through ankle to knee-deep water, sometimes lifting debris aside to clear paths for rescue operations. Residents attempted to salvage what they could, hoisting belongings above the water, pulling children along, and moving cautiously across treacherous sidewalks that had become narrow, slippery paths. In many areas, flowing water carried remnants of household materials, plastic containers, newspapers. Then came the third phase, the part that emerges only after the rain and the flooding, the discovery of damage. When the water finally began shrinking back, even slightly, what was revealed underneath told the city just how intense the storm had been. Roads showed signs of erosion, with patches of asphalt peeled away or broken apart. In several areas, small sinkholes appeared, exposing underlying soil washed out by the pressure of moving water. The images you will display clearly show fractured pavement, muddy surfaces, sections of road warped or depressed, and curb edges ripped open by flowing debris. Shops that had been hit by wind gusts earlier now displayed cracked glass, bent awnings, and water-damaged interiors. Some metal panels from rooftops or outdoor structures were found scattered meters away from their original position, pushed by the strongest gusts of the storm.